UN-related organizations, they just do not want to say the definition, or they do not have a working definition. My question has two parts. One is why it is difficult for certain organizations to define anti-Semitism. And the second part is, what is the definition of anti-Semitism?
Okay, great question, because very often everybody starts by defining what they're talking about. I'm one of the people who will find that a little bit difficult. And you asked me why it's difficult. And I think perhaps there are two reasons that I can think of. One is that actually, like pretty well any other social phenomenon, anti-Semitism requires a lot of judgment. So, it's not like a science where there's one variable, there are any number of variables. And what that means is that we have to use our judgment about what is anti-Semitic and what isn't. I also think the other reason probably why it's so difficult to define anti-Semitism is because the community of people within which we are trying to define anti-Semitism is also a community of people in which anti-Semitism is quite well entrenched. Now, that's quite unusual. So, for example, if we were trying to define racism or anti-Black racism amongst scholars, we would all start with a very clear kind of consensus, really, about what was racist and what wasn't. And of course, we'll have disagreements within that. And of course, some of the people who say that they're very vigilant on racism may not actually be quite as vigilant as they think. But we start anyway with a feeling of consensus. And we don't start in that way with anti-Semitism. We start with a polarization, actually. And the polarization is quite frightening. So that's why there is such a polarized discussion about definitions. Let me just say a word about the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Having said, I think it's really difficult to define anti-Semitism, I would also like to say that I strongly support the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And that's not because I think that the IRA definition is a kind of watertight machine that can tell us what is and what is not anti-Semitic. I don't think it is, and I don't think such a thing is possible. There's no app for your iPhone that you can just point it at something and say, is this anti-Semitic? I think IRA is really important because I think anyone who embraces IRA or who endorses the definition is saying one thing very clearly. And what they're saying is that the kind of anti-Semitism that takes the form of hostility to Israel, we might call it anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. If you embrace IRA, I think what you're saying is that you take anti-Zionist anti-Semitism seriously. You believe that it exists and it is significant. And you also believe that it often appears like this, and this, right? It gives you examples of how anti-Zionist anti-Semitism appears. But it gives you a couple of warnings too, the IRA definition. Firstly, it says you have to make every determination of a particular case in context. So, in fact, the IRA definition doesn't define anything to be anti-Semitic. What it says is that this kind of anti-Semitism is real and significant, and it looks like this, but you have to make a determination about anything specific according to context. And secondly, the IRA definition is also very clear when it says criticism of Israel, which is like the criticism of any other state, is not anti-Semitic. So I think IRA is useful because it makes clear that we see this kind of anti-Semitism and we take it seriously. I think it's actually a very tame document because it doesn't define anything as being anti-Semitic. It says you have to make a judgment according to context. And it also warns you very clearly that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. So in that context, it is a mystery, if you think about it like that. It's a complete mystery about why it is so controversial and why people are so worried about the IRA definition. And I think the reason people are so worried goes back to the polarization that I spoke about a minute ago. And I think the standard response to someone who raises the issue of contemporary anti-Semitism, who says they have experienced it, or who says that they would like to understand it or to study it or to write about it, the standard response is a kind of knowing, kind of, we know what you're up to, right? You say you're interested in anti-Semitism, but we know what you're really up to. And we're not going to accuse you of having got it wrong or make a misjudgment, but we're going to accuse you of getting it wrong deliberately. And that is the standard response that we get. Not that, you're a bit paranoid or you're a bit over worried about anti-Semitism, and I understand why. It's not that. It is you are raising the issue of anti-Semitism in bad faith, knowing it's not true, in the hope of silencing or delegitimizing ordinary criticism of the Israeli state.
That's a very elaborated definition. Or also, it's important to explain what surrounds the definition. And yes, indeed, it's about the judgment. I mean, I know our discussion today is not about online or social media, etc. But I think I wanted to bring something very troubling. I have been following something that started emerging on YouTube, which is a Yemeni guy dressing like Jewish, pretending to surround the Arab leaders around him, and that he is Israel and he is in control of the Arab world and he leads them. It's a very terrifying image to see, and it's definitely anti-Semitism. But the problem is that YouTube doesn't take it down. Anyway, so I think I wanted to mention this because it's a very recent. It's like it happened yesterday, and people started circulating it on social media and also via WhatsApp. I am from Mosul, and I started getting from people in Mosul sending me these messages with the video. Watch it before it gets deleted. So it's a very, I think the IRA definition, having not said what is anti-Semitism, but it told you that once you understand the definition, you will know, and there is no other option that you don't know that this is anti-Semitism. It leads me to the question, David, is that such anti-Semitism has found a fertile environment in what is supposed to be the space that provides us with the educated people who should contribute to our daily life, our daily needs, and that is the university. What is the current state, specifically among students' organizations being functional on campus? They do help students, etc. Establish a relation between faculty and the students, but they have been involved in another terrifying level of anti-Semitism in the past, in the very recent past, but also currently. So what's the current state of that?
Well, firstly, let's not be too surprised either if we come across anti-Semitism in universities or if we come across anti-Semitism in, broadly speaking, left and liberal politics. Let's not be too surprised, because anti-Semitism has been a serious phenomenon in both of those spaces before, and quite a number of times in history. That's not to say that anti-Semitism is not a problem in other spaces also, on the right or in religious thought or in other institutions. It is. But let's not pretend that universities or the liberal and left spaces are innocent, because they're not.